Is there discussion on this bill? Senator Sampson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. So we just heard a little bit about the Trust Act in Connecticut discussing the last bill. And very simply, this bill that's before us, Senate Bill 993, would repeal the Trust Act in its entirety. That's simply what it is. And just as a refresher, what the Trust Act is essentially a Connecticut law that was passed in 2013, I think it was, that essentially tells our municipal and state law enforcement officials not to cooperate with federal authorities on the subject of immigration. I just want to say that this is a very difficult and sensitive issue overall, and certainly for me. I know people that meet every classification. We are all immigrants. I've made this point on the floor last year that we are all the children and descendants of immigrants. And this bill is not even about immigration per se. It's about a bunch of things. It's about whether or not we respect the rule of law in this country, and whether or not we should be keeping a particular population of people that reside in our state captive as political pawns and not do something to solve the problem that is a national one, and that is the subject of illegal immigration in America. The Trust Act, as I mentioned in the previous conversation, was originally conceived as a way supposedly to develop trust between people who are undocumented in the community and the law enforcement authorities in their towns and cities. I don't think there's any evidence of that, first and foremost. I don't know of anyone that could point to a particular situation where someone said, now that the Trust Act exists, I'm going to call the authorities and report my neighbor who's a terrible criminal. They could do that already. Anyone can report a crime anonymously in this state. And I have asked several times, including when we had a debate on the floor of the House, I think it was last year, for anyone to point to a simple one example of a case where a crime was thwarted because some undocumented person used the Trust Act as a mechanism to protect themselves while reporting a crime. On the federal level is where this issue is failing. And what's sad is that it's become a political football between the political parties and various pundits who like to comment on politics. And I got to tell you, the issue really rubs me the wrong way sometimes because for someone like me who believes very strongly in the rule of law, and I believe that when I serve in the legislature and I take a vote on legislation and it becomes law, it ought to be followed because that's the way our country works. And it strikes me as odd that very often in this building, we often do things with complete and utter disregard for what the federal law says, when we know full well what our obligations are, what the law says, what the Constitution says, to know that there is a role that each government plays. If the towns across Connecticut said, you know what, we're not going to listen to your state law, we're going to do it our way, I think we would be upset. And this issue is a national issue. The issue of immigration is a national issue. It should be dealt with on a federal level, and that's why it is. I said at the public hearing that I completely sympathize with people wanting to get into America. I love this country, and I'm not leaving for anyone. And I can understand why other people who may have had the misfortune of being born in a place that is dangerous, where there's criminal activity, where they don't have the same opportunity to support their families, might want to find a way to America. I completely sympathize with that. I think that's why we have a legal immigration system. And we also have a policy nationally on the subject of amnesty. We also take in people who are potentially going to be harmed in their own countries. We have policies for these things for a reason. So the other thing is that while the vast majority of people that come here are coming here to seek a new life because they see opportunity here, there are some bad apples among them. And my issue with the Trust Act is that it essentially creates a place for those bad apples to hide amongst us. I would like to see the federal government actually resolve this issue in some way that allows the people in our state and across the country who are here illegally to come out of the shadows and to be recognized. Now, I don't condone amnesty. I do not want to give people citizenship who did not go through the process the right way. But there are other mechanisms. You could give someone a work permit. You could create some type of policy that allows people to come forward. And if that happened, then they could do things like work lawfully. I heard a lot of testimony during the debate about how the public hearing about how they pay taxes. People who are in our state and they're undocumented, they pay taxes. Well, and I know that. They pay some taxes. They will pay sales taxes, for instance, but they are not paying income taxes because they can't lawfully work. How are folks here supporting themselves? What we have created is a situation where these non-citizens are basically a second-class non-citizen group of people living in our state. And I think that's terrible. I think it's a lousy message to send. And as long as we have policies like the Trust Act, you are perpetuating that situation. What needs to happen is for someone to say, no, the rule of law matters. We understand that the federal law is supreme, and force our federal government to actually address this problem. Sadly, I think it's become such a good political issue for each political party to keep throwing stones at each other over that there's no desire to do so. The problem is that puts that group of people in the middle without ever getting the real chance at American opportunity that they could have. So, and I know that, I put this bill forward to repeal the Trust Act, and I know full well that there are people that are going to say that I'm a racist and I'm a bigot and I'm this and that because I put in a bill to crack down on illegal immigration. But I'm here to tell you that's not true. I'm not a racist. I'm not a bigot. I actually believe in the principle of America. Do you know that America takes in over 1 million immigrants lawfully every year? Over 1 million. And you know that we could probably take in 2 million lawful immigrants every year if there was not so much illegal immigration. But this state continues to make policy to tell people to come here. We give out in-state tuition. We give out driver's licenses. There are untold amount of entitlement benefits you can receive without being a citizen. But what you don't get is the chance to actually have real opportunity, work a job above board, to be able to go to bed at night knowing that you're not going to be found out someday that you're in the country unlawfully, regardless of the Trust Act or not. And that's a shame. That is a horrible, horrible shame. We have 7 representatives in our federal government from our state. We have 2 U.S. senators and we have 5 congressmen, and I have never heard a single one of them demand that we address this exact situation a way where the federal government changes the law. I started this conversation by talking about why I don't believe that sanctuary policies or the Trust Act builds trust. I can go on just a little bit more to say that many of the people that come here are coming from places that are corrupt, where the local law enforcement folks are corrupt. And sometimes you have to give them a bribe, or you got to pay them off, or some other ridiculous thing that we can't even imagine in America. But The Trust Act, in a way, is a very similar thing because it says simply that we know that we have laws. We have a federal law on what our immigration policy is, but we're going to ignore it. I don't think that's a very good message to send anyone. I also want to just expand on the supremacy issue. The supremacy clause is one thing, that the federal government sets policy for immigration, but they actually went a step further in 1996 because they were afraid that states were going to start taking it upon themselves to ignore that policy, and they passed a law to prevent it from happening, and that law is called the Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigrant Responsibility Act, which essentially prohibits state and local governments from restricting their employees from cooperating with federal officials. So there is a federal law on top of the fact this is a federal law that restricts us from doing what we're doing, not just the fact that the federal government creates the immigration law that we have. I have a stack of newspaper and online articles next to me here of various circumstances to point out cases where the bad apples have acted. I was going to go on and list each one and remind us that there are victims of those bad apples, and that the best solution for us is to know who is living among us. And if people are here, even unlawfully, but they are not criminals, then they should be able to walk around freely and have the same opportunities that the rest of us have. But that requires federal action, as I said. There are also statistics about the cost of illegal immigration. I've looked up a study that says the United States expense is $85 billion, and the cost in Connecticut in 2017 was $1.14 billion is the net cost. So that means there's a recognition that folks undocumented in our state do pay some taxes, but overall there is a tremendous cost. And on our current budget situation, I don't think it's something we should be paying for. So I guess in closing, since I think I've already made my point pretty thoroughly, and I don't think anyone wants to listen to a collection of tragic news stories, I just want to say that while I certainly and absolutely understand why people tried to come to the United States, even illegally, I don't condone that. I believe that we are the greatest country on earth because of our system of government and our rule of law, and the respect that we have, that when the campaigns are over, that our job here is to make good, effective public policy in good faith with one another. I believe that if we do our job and honor the federal law and use our collective force as a legislative body, along with our federal officials, that we can lead the way in forcing the federal government to enact a sensible immigration policy that prevents these one-off non-solutions that risk our public safety. And we can take the folks that we're talking about here and allow them to get out of the shadows, be productive members of American society, and not simply pawns to various political talking points. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I urge that we pass this bill. Thank you.